Two brothers. Same parents. Same childhood. Same $40,000 inheritance when their grandfather passed away in 2010. They both decided to invest it in dividend funds. They both wanted passive income. They both thought they were making smart decisions. 14 years later, one of them is collecting over $6,000 a year in dividend income on a portfolio worth $180,000. The other one is collecting $3,200 a year on a portfolio worth $61,000. Same starting amount, same 14 years, a $119,000 difference in wealth and nearly double the annual income. The only thing that separated them was which type of dividend fund they chose on day one. The first brother, let's call him Marcus, did what most people do when they discover dividend investing. He searched for the highest yield he could find. He found a fund paying 9.2% annually. He did the math. $40,000 at 9.2% is $3,680 a year in income. He thought he had cracked the code. He invested everything and started collecting checks. The second brother, let's call him David, went a different route. He found a fund called SCHD, which at the time yielded around 3.1%. On $40,000, that was only $12,240 a year. Less than half of what Marcus was collecting. David's friends thought he made the worst choice. His own brother thought he made the worst choice. For the first 2 or 3 years, by the numbers, it looked like they were right. Here's what happened next and why the gap between them grew into 6 figures. Marcus's high yield fund was paying that 2% by doing something that looks like income but is not really income. It was selling covered call options on its holdings, capping its own price appreciation in exchange for premium income to distribute. In a flat or declining market, this works fine. In the bull market that ran from 2012 through 2021, the fund collected its premiums but missed most of the price appreciation that the broader market delivered. The $40,000 Marcus invested grew to about $52,000 over 14 years. His income stayed roughly flat the entire time, hovering between $3,200 and $4,100 annually, depending on the year. Never compounding in any meaningful way because the underlying asset base was barely growing. David's SCHD position told a completely different story. The fund started at 3.1% yield but raised its dividend every single year. By year 3, the yield on his original $40,000 cost basis had climbed to 3.8%. By year 7, it was 5.1%. By year 14, it was pushing 7.2% on cost. His $40,000 had grown to $180,000 because SCHD selects for financially healthy companies with growing earnings, and those companies grew in value as their profits grew. The dividend income compounded right alongside the asset value. What started as $240 a year in income had become $6,000 a year, and both the income and the portfolio value were still growing. This is the fundamental difference between high yield and dividend growth that nobody explains clearly enough when people are first learning about dividend investing. High yield funds give you income today by sacrificing growth tomorrow. They are collecting and distributing premiums or returns of capital or high-risk debt payments. And the underlying asset does not compound in value the way a quality equity fund does. The income looks impressive on paper. The total return over a decade usually does not. Dividend growth funds give you less income today in exchange for income that compounds and a portfolio that compounds alongside it. The yield on cost, meaning the annual dividend divided by what you originally paid, keeps rising every year as the underlying companies raise their dividends. The patience required in the early years is the price you pay for the compounding that happens in the later years. Let's run the numbers directly, so this is not abstract. $40,000 invested in a fund yielding 9% with 0 dividend growth and 0 share price growth over 14 years produces $5,040 annually at the end. The portfolio is still worth $40,000. Total income collected over 14 years at a flat $30,600 average is roughly $50,400. Total wealth created including the original principal is $90,400. $40,000 invested in a fund yielding 3.1%, but growing its dividend at 8% annually and its share price at 10% annually over 14 years, with dividends reinvested, produces a portfolio worth approximately $180,000 yielding 7.2% on cost, which is $12,960 annually at year 14. Total income collected over 14 years with reinvestment factored in is embedded in that $180,000 figure. Total wealth created is $180,000 versus the $90,400 from the high yield approach. That is not a small difference. That is the difference between comfortable and wealthy. That is the difference between supplemental income and income that actually replaces a salary. Now here is the part that trips people up when they first hear this. They assume the answer is always dividend growth over high yield in every situation for every person. That is not quite right either. If you are 65 years old and you need your $300,000 portfolio to generate $1, $800 a month right now to pay your bills, waiting 15 years for your yield on cost to compound to a useful level is not a strategy. It is a fantasy. A retiree who needs income immediately has a completely legitimate reason to prioritize current yield over long-term yield growth. The high yield fund is not wrong for that person. It is wrong for the 35-year-old who has 30 years ahead of them and is choosing current income over compounding for no reason other than the higher number looked more exciting on the fund's description page. The question is not which type of dividend fund is better in the abstract. The question is which type matches what you are actually trying to accomplish and when you actually need the income to start. If you are still in the accumulation phase, meaning you are reinvesting everything and you do not need the income to pay bills, dividend growth funds like SCHD or VIG or DGROW will almost certainly produce more total wealth over a 20 to 30 year horizon. The compounding of both the dividend and the share price working together is a more powerful engine than high current yield with limited growth. If you are at or near the point where you need the portfolio to produce income to live on and you cannot wait a decade for the yield on cost to compound to a livable level, a blend that includes higher current yield funds alongside a dividend growth fund is a reasonable strategy. The key is not chasing the highest yield you can find without understanding why it is that high. A 9% yield from a covered call strategy is a very different product from a 9% yield from a fund that is quietly returning your own capital to you while the share price declines. Both show up as 9% on the screen. Only one of them is actually building your wealth. Marcus figured this out eventually. He moved his remaining portfolio into a blend of SCHD and a growth index fund in 2021. He is rebuilding. But the 14 years he spent in the high yield fund are 14 years of compounding he cannot get back. David is not rubbing it in. But he is also not stressed about retirement. The difference between them was one decision made in 2010, and the gap it created has only gotten wider every year since.